Good morning. Thank you guys for being here. We will be very brief. We know we have an august guest coming in a few minutes to the Hill, President Trump. Last week we gave a letter signed by 16 Republican senators to Leader McConnell, and it basically it did two things. One is it offered our support for anything that leadership felt we needed to do, and that's work Mondays, Fridays, weekends, any breaks, including the August break, to accomplish two goals. One is to speed up the nomination process, and two is make sure we get the government funded by the end of the fiscal year. This is the first time in U.S. history in 230 years that the minority party has not waived the 30-hour debate rule. Consequently, today, 15 months into this presidency, we have 276 nominees backlogged waiting for confirmation hearings. And that's after a yeoman's job of our leadership and Laura Dove as a secretary getting all this done over the last year and a half. This is nothing but pure, unadulterated obstructionism. This year as well, we want to make sure we fund the government without having to use a continuing resolution or backing into a year-end omnibus. So this is a very simple letter that offered our support to leadership, just like we did last year when Leader McConnell offered this up to keep us here in August, and we got 77 confirmations done in one day. So this is nothing more than trying to make our government work again. Joni Ernst is next up. Thanks, Joni.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Senator Perdue, and good morning, everybody. And as far as I know, being a member of Congress is the only occupation where you can neglect some of the most important duties and then take a month-long vacation right before the deadline. And besides providing for our national defense, one of the most fundamental responsibilities of Congress is to fund the government. Yet since 1974, we have passed all of our appropriations bills just 4 times. However, every August, right before the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, Congress heads off to whatever destination on vacation, heading home. They pack their bags. They leave for a month-long vacation and leaving behind mountains of work to get done. Right now, we have less than 12 weeks to finish 12 appropriations bills before the end of this fiscal year. We have countless nominations, as Senator Perdue noted, and we have a number of other important must-pass legislative initiatives. If we take another August off, we will likely find ourselves once again relying on these horrible continuing resolutions, which have a devastating effect on our military and create billions in waste across our federal government. Our constituents deserve better than this cycle of governing from crisis to crisis. Congress hasn't passed a budget and regular appropriations bills. If they haven't by August, we shouldn't be able to leave on vacation or go home or go wherever. We should be working nights. We should be working weekends. We should be working through August and any other state work period to pass these appropriations bills and to get our nominations done in a timely manner. Senator Perdue, thank you so much for getting this group together. Thanks to my colleagues for joining in on this issue. We must get our work done. We have made a commitment to our constituents, and we need to see that through. Thank you very much, Senator Perdue. Thanks, colleagues. I'll be followed by Senator Mike Lee.
When I served as a Senate page more than 30 years ago, I remember on more occasions than I can count, times when the Senate remained in session through weekends, times when the Senate had a lot of things to consider, and so it didn't recess, whether it was for the weekend or for the week or for a longer period of time. It is significant that we're supposed to be passing a dozen or more spending bills, each covering a different area of government. To me, that's significant, but what's even more significant is to have any spending legislation, whether it's a dozen bills or 3 or 4 bills, or whether it's one bill that can be read, reviewed, evaluated by the American people, and can be amended on the Senate floor under the light of day, with the American people being able to interact with their elected representatives here in the United States Senate. That's important. And so when we received this 2,232-page spending bill a few weeks ago on a Wednesday evening, and then when we found that it was passed by the House of Representatives before lunch the next day and passed by the Senate that night, it occurred to many of us this is not okay, especially when you consider the fact that most of the 435 members of the House and most of the 100 members of the Senate, and more importantly, most of the people represented by those members of Congress were completely kept out of the loop of that process. And so that's why, particularly with regard to the spending bill, we ought to be bringing something up not just hours or days, but weeks or even better, months in advance. If it's one bill, fine, but let it be open. Let it be subjected to an amendment process, one in which the American people can be involved. And of course, it's not just spending bills that need to be done, it's also confirmations of judges, of executive branch appointees. Shoot, at the rate we're going right now, some have said that it would take a decade for this administration to be fully staffed. So we've got to be willing to stay in through weekends and not adjourn for the week, for the weekend, or for much longer periods of time until we are ready to go. You might think of the Senate in some ways as analogous to a steam-driven locomotive engine. When you light up that boiler, it takes some time to get the water heated, to begin producing steam. And it takes a while to produce enough steam to drive the piston one revolution. Once it's going, you've got more steam, and that piston can keep going. It's a little bit like the Senate in some ways. When we open this thing up at the beginning of the week, it may take some time to get it going. Once it gets going, it can keep going. And so when we blow the whistle, just a few days later, for the weekend, for the week, or sometimes longer, that halts the process. I think we need to get away from this. I think the American people can expect more, and they can expect much better. And I'm pleased to introduce my colleague Bill Cassidy next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let me start off by emphasizing the success that this Congress has had so far. We have the best economy since the year 2000, the lowest taxes in 31 years, a stronger military. We've repealed 15 different regulations, and we've been told that that has saved businesses $63 billion in compliance costs that instead they can use to employ people, to do long-term capital investment to improve productivity. 21 circuit conservative judges open up ANWR, which will be important to my friend Dan Sullivan, and I can go on, repealing the individual mandate of Obamacare. We think we've been successful, but we can go from success to greater success. And I liked how Mike Lee put it. You can get that boiler going, and once that boiler is going, then you can achieve even more. I'll also echo what he said. I voted against the spending bill because within 24 hours we were supposed to review, digest, understand a 2,000-page bill spending quite a sum of money. That is not worthwhile. So with this, we hope that either the deadline of we need to get it done before we go back to our states and engage in state activity, or the extra time that would then be afforded if we don't get it done, will allow us to continue our success, take it to another level, and if it comes to spending, allow us more time to review as opposed to being dropped in our laps and saying we're voting tomorrow. So thank you again, Senator Perdue, for putting this together, and thanks for my colleagues for co-sponsoring. Now I have the privilege of introducing Senator Steve Daines.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Take a look at the faces that showed up here this morning. This is a new generation that has come to the United States Senate. I spent 28 years in the private sector before coming to Congress. When you're in business, when you have a private operation, typically budgets are locked down 2 months before the fiscal year begins. And contrast that to Washington, D.C. We were 6 months in to the nation's fiscal year before Congress finally passed a spending bill. That's unacceptable. Congress is not getting the people's business done and not getting it done in time. This is because of great obstruction that's going on right now in this Congress. It is time to move beyond that and finish the work that the people sent us here to do. In Montana, farmers and ranchers don't work Monday through Thursday and take weekends off. In Montana, farmers and ranchers don't take an August recess because cows need to be fed 24 hours a day. And similarly, here in Washington, D.C., we have a lot of work left to be done to do the work of the people. President Trump talked about making America great again. He's doing that. He also talked about draining the swamp. It is time to drain the swamp, and we can help do that by keeping the pumps running in August. It's time to cancel the August recess, keep members here, get the spending bills passed, and get President Trump's nominees through the Senate and working on behalf of the American people.
Thanks. I think what Steve has just said, I'm Mike Rounds out of South Dakota, and I ran a small business for a number of years, also had the opportunity to serve as governor of the state of South Dakota for 8 years. And I can tell you that during a legislative session that is a whole 40 days and 40 nights long, we get our work done. And we do it every single year. And if we didn't get our work done, they'd fire us. And that means we didn't leave session, we didn't go home until we actually got the job done. Yet here in Washington, D.C., there seems to be this laissez-faire attitude that basically it doesn't really matter because it's all going to be there when we get back. And so for the last 44 years, since the Budget Act of 1974, time and time again, there's only been 4 times in which they've actually made it work the way that it's supposed to. But during the rest of the time, it's like it's no big deal, and it doesn't seem to matter to the rest of the world whether or not we get our work done on time. September 30th, when this whole thing kind of comes together and when it's all done, people of America should be able to look back and understand what's going to happen on October 1st. They should understand exactly what's going to be spent and where it's going to be spent. Can you imagine contractors trying to understand whether or not they're going to be able to actually have a contract with the federal government when we don't even have a budget process in that's working, and there are some folks who just seem to think it's okay to let it go for a couple of months, and then to create an omnibus bill in which we're expected to pass it because, well, if we don't, government shuts down, or at least part of the government does, and at the same time, we haven't had a chance to fully digest it. This, I think most of us would share with you, is not something that we think is going to fix the world, but this is one of the first steps that we can do, is to say, let's get our work done on time. Let's actually take the 30% of the budget that we're voting on here. And I'll remind you, this is defense and non-defense discretionary, which is about 30% of what we're actually going to spend. Let's at least get this out on time. The mandatory programs that are there right now, we still have to address. And that's where most of the deficit is actually being created. But until we actually have a process in which we're getting our work done on time, and we have an opportunity to actually show a process that we can then expand into the rest of the budget, we're not going to fix this mess we've got up here. $20 trillion in debt. When we go home and we ask people what they think about it, they want to know why we're not doing our job. Number one, we're not getting it done on time. And second of all, when we do, we seem to think that it's okay that we're not balancing our budget. If you can't even get your work done on time, how do you ever expect to balance the budget long term? So I'm going to thank Senator Perdue for taking the lead on this. Again, this year, this is 2 years in a row. You see a lot of the same faces up here, but I think our team is growing in size, saying to leadership, we want to be a tool that you can use to push the issue of getting things done. I think our leadership understands very clearly that they would like to get this stuff done on time, but they've got to be able to have the backup when we say, look, we're not going to be able to get out of here on Thursday night. We're probably going to need to work a Friday. Or maybe we do need to take a couple of those weeks in August and actually get more of this stuff done, or at least go to the Democrat colleagues who in most cases have said, we're really not just going to agree to any kind of a program in which we have other judges confirmed in a more orderly fashion. But to have those of us here standing behind them saying we support you in your goals of getting this stuff done on time, that's what this is all about. Showing leadership that there's a group of us that really do believe long term this is the right thing to do, and you've got to start someplace. With that, my colleague Dan Sullivan from Alaska is here to kind of wrap things up. Dan?
Thanks, Mike. Just a couple points to really re-emphasize here. I think there's some stories that don't always get out. First, Bill Cassidy talked about, we actually got a lot done in 2017. I would say historic, working with the White House and the Republican Congress, whether it's tax reform, best economy since 2000, since the year 2000, tax reform, biggest tax reform in 31 years, stronger military, we're rebuilding our military. That was a trend that was going in the wrong direction. Judges, Supreme Court justices, regulations, repealed 15 with regard to the CRA. Energy, we're unleashing the promise of American energy. Repealed the Obama individual mandate. Foreign policy, sanctions. I mean, it is a long list. It's a positive list. It's historic in many ways. So that's something we want to keep that momentum. But one other story that's not getting out there, and we would certainly, this is all part of this, is the stalled nominee process. By any measure, what's going on with the Democrats on the other side, is historic obstructionism. If this were President Obama's nominees being obstructed, no offense to my colleagues in the media, there would be a front page story every day. Let me just give you a little bit. First term use of cloture, George H.W. Bush on nominees 1 time. Bill Clinton 10 times, George W. Bush 4 times, Barack Obama 17 times. First 17 months of Donald Trump, 93 times. That's not a story. That's a story, and that's what we're here trying to address. We'd love it if you guys could maybe focus on that a little bit more. But there's another story here, and that's the budget. And this isn't a partisan issue from our perspective. This is more of a generational issue. If you look at who is writing these letters, who is focused on this, it's the newer senators. And the budget process is clearly broken. CRs, omnibuses, which almost nobody on this letter to the leader, McConnell, voted for that omnibus a couple of weeks ago. So what we're trying to do is say we want to build on this progress, break the logjam on nominees, which is unprecedented obstructionism. By the way, there's a lot of Democrats, when you talk to them, who don't like the weaponizing of the cloture procedure that Chuck Schumer has used. And they also don't like this broken budget process. So we think there's an opportunity here. You may have seen the press release from the chairman of the Appropriations, Richard Shelby, and Pat Leahy yesterday about, hey, we're going to try to get 12 appropriations bills out and bring them to the floor. That's important. That's progress. That's what we're talking about. But if we need more time to get the nominees done and get the budget done in the right way, which it hasn't been done for decades, then we can create more time. That's the key. We can create more time. And that's what we're up here talking about.
With that, thank you, guys. With that, we'll take a few questions. I think we have a minute or two before the president actually is scheduled to be on the air. Yes, ma'am.
Which of your Democratic colleagues do you think you can win over?
On which issue?
Working the full 39 working days you have left for the fiscal year.
Well, quite frankly, we're not leaving it up to them. This is the leader McConnell's decision. Like last year, he listened to us and agreed and decided to stay here in August. And then the Democrats came and said that they were willing to work with us on nominees. And at that point, we confirmed 77 nominations. And what makes that so interesting is that prior to that time, the entire year, we had only done, I think the number was 44. So this is our decision. We're in the majority, albeit a thin one. And we want to work with the Democrats. Look, the defense authorization is a perfect example. Defense appropriation. Last year, we passed defense appropriations in the subcommittee unanimously, but we tried 6 times to get it to the floor, and it was obstructed by the Democrats. Some of the same ones that voted for it in committee did not vote to put it on the floor.
But just a related point to your question. There's a number, and I would say it's the newer members on the Democratic side, who are very interested in working on fixing the budget process, how it's broken, the CRs, the omnibuses. You guys know the drill, and we'll let them speak for themselves, but there's a number of them. And again, I think this is more generational. If you've been here a real long time, you see, well, what's wrong with a CR? What's wrong with an omnibus? It's 2,400 pages, and you have 24 hours to read, $1.3 trillion in spending. A lot of the newer senators think there's a lot wrong with that, and it's not, and it's a bipartisan view that we need to fix it.
You know, back on our colleagues across the aisle, there's a number of our colleagues that share the same frustration and concern. Interestingly enough, some of them are governors, former governors. I think of Governor Rounds here, where the state of South Dakota got their budgets, they got them balanced and passed in time. Why? Oftentimes there's an incentive in place, whether you want to call it a carrot or a stick, that if they don't get the budgets passed, they don't go home. I think we need to look at that. Senator Perdue is leading that effort of reforming the overall budget process. Perhaps we ought to say, you know, if Congress can't get the budget passed, they don't go home. That would fit pretty well here with the September 30th fiscal year end.
Yeah.
So 2 questions. Do you expect Trump to bring this up at the lunch today, or do you want him to? Did you ask him to? And the second question is, also when Trump is talking to you guys, do you expect him to address the comments that one of his staffer made about John McCain?
You know, let me address that first. I regret that comment by that employee. That certainly does not speak for this president or any of us in our caucus. I heard Mitch McConnell last night on the floor of the Senate talk about his visit last weekend with John McCain, and he called him an American hero. I'm going to put an exclamation point on that and leave it at that. John McCain is an American hero. We didn't always agree, but he will go down in history as an American hero, and he's fighting like crazy right now. With regard to this president, I would never forestage what he will or won't say. I will only refer you to what he said this weekend in a tweet. And he said, look, what Senator Daines just said, if we get to August 1 and we haven't funded the government, we need to stay here and get the government funded. He has said earlier, a few weeks ago when he signed that omnibus, that please don't bring me another bill. I don't want to ever sign another omnibus like this again. Don't jam me up on another omnibus. So I think that those two comments speak loud and clear about where this president is.
Would you like to hear the president talk about McCain today?
Oh, I'd like to hear that, but I would not suggest that. I mean, I don't know what his speech is, and I think that the topic of the day we're here to talk about, frankly, is how to get the government working again. That's what this president's been talking about for now 15 months.
Senator, on nominations, if there's a Supreme Court vacancy this summer, should it be the next Senate or this Senate that confirms Trump's nominee for a replacement?
You guys want to take that?
I'll take it. Should be this Senate.
Why?
Number one, we're here in office today, and second of all, this is not the case of where you have a presidential election coming up in 2018. And so for me, you've got a president who is halfway through his term, and he's got a long way to go yet. It is not a case of where the American public would be setting up a precedent or making an announcement as to whether or not they agree or disagree with the president at this point with regard to his judicial nominees. So I think the president most certainly has the opportunity and is timely in making a nomination, and this Senate most clearly has an obligation to consider that nomination in a timely fashion. If you're coming back down and you're in the last couple of months of a presidential term in which you know the president is either termed out, I think those things can be argued to be different, as was done in the last time around. But in this particular case, I have no objections to having this president make that nomination, and I most certainly would look forward to the vetting process.
To follow up on that, so if there was a Supreme Court opening in 2020, do you think that the Senate
Then I think you take a second look at it, and most certainly I can tell you that, like anything else in Washington, D.C., politics will play a role. I think if you have a Republican Senate and a Republican, and the possibility of a continued Republican in the White House beyond that point, I think it'd be very difficult for Republicans not to say, go ahead and send the nomination up. On the other hand, if Democrats are in control of the Senate, I suspect, as they have in the past, they may very well say, send one up, but we may not consider that. So look, politics has a lot to do with it, just as it has in the past. Let me just make one real quick thing. You mentioned John McCain on this and what our thoughts were, and I can't help but just make this suggestion. I think long term, in the history of this country, when we think of duty, honor, and country, we will also think of John McCain, Senator John McCain.
Are you frustrated at all by the way that they've handled this or not addressed this in the last 6 days?
Personally, yes, because I think this man is deserving of our respect, and I think that sense of how we respond to individuals who have not been treated with respect is a message to the rest of the country. And I know it's probably not their style to make apologies, but I can tell you that I think the vast majority of Americans would say that John McCain deserves our respect, and that's from the top to the bottom.
Here, I'll make one statement on that. I put a statement out that was pretty clear on where I stood. And, this is one of these stories that's, of course there should be an apology. And I think more broadly, we need to be thinking less about kind of, senseless comments and more about prayers for a great American, right? That's what we should be focused on. So this story kind of can end itself pretty quickly, and, we should be thinking about keeping John McCain in our prayers.
I think we have time for one more. If there's one more. Yes.
Have you had any conversations with Leader McConnell yet about your conversations within yourselves about longer work weeks and shorter August recess? Are you planning to meet
Yeah, he was very receptive. And, you know, the leader has a tough job, right? He's got 50 now, senators, 51 Republicans, but he's having to deal with the Democratic obstructionism, as Senator Sullivan called it earlier. It's historic obstructionism. So I spoke with him last night. I think it was the last time I spoke with him about this morning again. He's very supportive of doing exactly what we're intending to do. And remember, this letter is not an affront to our leadership. Basically, it's supportive of our leadership, just like it was last year. And the leadership used it last year, and we got great results, and I'm hopeful we'll do the same this year. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your interest. Thanks.